welcome, hello, and welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us for Managing Student Debt. We are excited to partner with Equal Justice Works and the PSLF Coalition as the Washington Council of Lawyers. If you don't know who the Washington Council of Lawyers are, it's us. Welcome. We're the Voluntary Public Interest Bar Association, here to support public interest and pro bono attorneys here in Washington, D.C. with all of your skills, programming, and community-based needs. We are excited to continue to bring programming to our entire community. If you are not yet a member, we highly recommend that you join. This is a special shout out to the folks that are currently in law school and are going to be transitioning into practice very soon. If your school is a PIJC organization subscriber, you will get a PIJC subscription, which is our Public Interest Jobs Clearinghouse, a fantastic resource. Keep that resource after you graduate by joining us. And you can also join us for other upcoming events, including our next event, which is tomorrow from 12 to 1:30 via Zoom. It's our best practices in pro bono session using AI to further access to justice. This is going to be a really cool conversation, so I highly recommend that you join us. And then our racial justice series, Partnerships Creating Deep and Lasting Change. We're going to learn more about the Law Firm Anti-Racism Alliance and the incredible partnerships that they have been creating since their inception to promote pro bono service that combats racism in our community. You can see that and more on our upcoming events page on our website. With all that being said, I am now going to turn it over to Aoife Delargy Lowe, the Vice President of Law School Engagement and Advocacy at Equal Justice Works. Aoife.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. It's lovely to be with you this evening. I'm delighted that there are some evening students here and day students as well, and people from the DC public interest community. I've probably been a member of WCL since 2015, so it's a great community if this is your first event. I used to work at a law school and talk about, public interest careers, and then I came to Equal Justice Works about 5 years ago. So it's been great to be able to educate tons of law students and young lawyers and folks later on their career about how to manage your student debt. And the reason that Equal Justice Works does this work is that we are the leading allied member of the PSLF coalition. We have over 100 allied members, part of our coalition from across the country, from all walks of public service professions that are united around the fact that this program is so incredibly important to the communities that we serve. So I want to make sure that you have a general overview of how to manage your student debt, make sure that you understand the components of public service loan forgiveness and some kind of supplemental things that'll help you along the way in terms of managing your student debt in general if you don't ultimately go on to earn public service loan forgiveness, but you do want to be smart and savvy about making sure that you're taking advantage of any resources that are available to you on your kind of student debt journey. So we're going to jump right into public service loan forgiveness. And I want to make sure you kind of understand the kind of core ingredients to make sure that you can stay on track to ultimately earn. So to qualify for PSLF today, you have to be employed by a qualifying employer. And this could be, federal, state, local, or tribal government, or a non-for-profit organization. You also have to work full-time for that organization, and we'll unpack that further later on. And you have to have the right type of loans. Generally speaking, if you have direct loans, you have the right type of loans. And you also have to be in the right type of repayment plan. And we're going to talk about what repayment plans are and are not eligible. But ultimately, you have to make 120 qualifying payments, which is 10 years of public service. It doesn't have to be consecutive. You can kind of stop and start the clock if you want to work, at a firm or in the for-profit sector for a while and then come back to public service. But ultimately, once you've served 10 years of public service, you put your hand up to the Department of Education and say, I do believe that I've done my 120, qualifying, or I've made my 120 qualifying payments at my 10 years of public service, and I believe that my loan should be forgiven tax-free. That is not considered a taxable event. It is the only program that's not considered a taxable event as they are designed. Whereas with the other income-driven repayment forgivenesses that we're going to talk about, they are a taxable event in the year that you're forgiven, either your 20th or 25th year, depending on, you know, which one you've opted for. All right, so let's kind of unpack that qualifying employer and how you make sure that you're on track and you're working for a qualifying employer or employers in the future, so that you can ultimately earn PSLF. So we talked about what is eligible: 501c3s, federal, state, local, and tribal. That includes the military branches. Peace Corps and AmeriCorps also count. And then there's a smaller list of organizations that do work that the federal government believe is very important. And that's that finer print list there. But they technically don't have 501c3 status for the purpose of the IRS. So they're a little bit harder to rely on. And when you're interviewing, you know, with a new employer, and if it isn't very blatantly obvious that it's not one of the following, the top 3 bullet points, and it potentially is an organization that's not a 501c3, you're going to have to do a little bit more digging, and it is worth kind of bringing it up in your interview of like, has the organization been confirmed as an eligible employer for PSLF? You know, if you end up having to certify your employment retroactively at any point, you're going to go and look for the identification number of your employer, EIN, and you'll be able to find that on your W-2s. And that's how you're going to be able to ultimately show I worked from this date to this date at that employer, or they're my current employer. And this screenshot on the right-hand side is actually from the Federal Student Aid site. And they, in essence, have this kind of like ever-growing library of EINs that have been assessed for whether or not they're eligible or not. Now, you could come up with a situation where when you put it into the system, they don't register the number. Perhaps it's a brand new organization. That's okay. They're going to make that assessment. And in the meantime, because you've put the number into their system and they're assessing it, if it is ultimately, you know, deemed to be an eligible employer, that time you're waiting to get that determination will count towards PSLF. So in the scenario where you had an uncooperative former employer or the organization closed, there is a way to, you know, ultimately certify that employment with alternative documentation to ultimately, you know, add to whatever amount of time you were working for that employer towards the 10 years of public service. It is a little bit more tedious, but you can do it. It just means you have to have more supplemental evidence like pay stubs, etc. And you will have to use the manually download the PSLF form to do this, unlike using the PSLF help tool, which is on Federal Student Aid. And we generally say that's the best thing to use at this day and age. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Okay, so full-time employment for the purposes of PSLF right now is alone or when combined equals to 30 hours a week. There's some, you know, employment that is counterintuitive to folks. You know, teachers don't teach during the summer, but they are contracted as full-time employees. So they are full-time and they are eligible for PSLF. You know, if you're a government contractor, you do actually have to be employed by the employer. So if you're a contractor, unfortunately, because you're not actually employed for that agency that you can contract it to, you aren't technically eligible for PSLF. So keep that in mind. You also have to factor in, you know, you have to be paid for the work that you're doing. So if you served on a nonprofit board, that wouldn't technically qualify. You do have to be an employee and you're working 30 hours a week for that organization, okay? FMLA is included. So if you take maternity leave, you are eligible for that. All right, so I want to unpack what an income-driven repayment plan is, because that does tether into ultimately earning PSLF. It can be a fantastic tool for you and generally the smartest way to earn PSLF. So an IDR is an income-driven repayment plan. It does exactly what it says in the tin. It's factoring in what you make on an annual basis, your discretionary income, how many dependents you have if you're married or not, depending on the plan that you're looking at. in order to factor in how much you're going to be paying down on your loans each month. Now, you probably, if you're in a situation where you're in public service, the vast majority of you are not going to be making what you'd be making in the for-profit sector. So you mightn't actually be making or paying off each month under an IDR the base and the interest of the loan, but you know that you're paying towards it for the 10 years to ultimately get it fully forgiven, tax-free in that 10th year. Now, there are certain situations where folks are enrolling in a plan that makes sense for them, and their payment each month is technically calculated as a zero because they're making so little, but that zero counts as a 1 towards the 120 you need to ultimately earn PSLF. So it is really worth your while taking a look at all of the plans that are currently available. And I jumped backwards for 1 second. That hyperlink, we can share this PDF or this PowerPoint slide with you. The loan simulator on federal student aid is a great resource for you to kind of simulate what your monthly payment would look like. And I also encourage you to look into an organization that is an allied member of the PSLF coalition. It's called Access Lex. They also have fantastic resources and a calculator that can help you kind of navigate and decide which income-driven repayment plan you want to choose. So, in terms of what plans are eligible for PSLF, all of the income-driven repayment plans are eligible. The Save on Valuable Education Plan, or Saving on a Valuable Education Plan, excuse me, it has replaced Revised Pay As You Earn. It's brand new. It's only been out about a year. It's being said it's the most generous plan out there at the moment, but do your homework. Like, if you're making more than $70,000 a year, it mightn't be worth your while. You may actually be better off in a plan like Pay As You Earn. So do take a look and do the kind of use the loan simulator and the calculator to kind of estimate what it's going to look like. So those are all eligible to keep you on track for the 10 years to ultimately earn PSLF. The other plan that's eligible and is very counterintuitive is that standard 10-year plan. Why would I want to have forgiveness at 10 years if I've already paid off the base and the interest of the loan? But the vast majority of you, if after your 6-month grace period, when you graduate law school ends, if you don't actively opt into one of the income-driven repayment plans, you're going to automatically be enrolled in the standard repayment plan, where you're paying off the base and the interest each month over 10 years. And it can be quite a lot of money. So keep in mind, if you started off on that standard repayment plan for a couple of months, and you realize this is not viable, and you move to an income-driven repayment plan, those months you're on the standard will count towards the 120 months that you need ultimately to earn PSLF. So all's not lost, they qualified. And you don't have to stay on the same plan for the entirety of your 10 years in public service. You can change them, and you will have to recertify on a regular basis what plan you want to be in. So just keep that in mind. But you do want to steer clear of plans that don't qualify for PSLF, okay? And that's the standard repayment plan for direct consolidation loans, the graduated repayment plan, and the extended repayment plan. Those are ones that if you stay on them, or you have any months at all in those, they're not going to count towards PSLF. So I just want to kind of lift up the kind of 3 tranches of loans. There are the loans that are just naturally eligible if you have them. If you're in law school right now, the vast majority of you are going to have these direct loans, unless you're a mature student and you had loans out from many years ago as well that you're still paying off. So the direct loans on that left-hand side under eligible, they're all naturally going to be on track to ultimately earn PSLF. The loans that are not eligible, and there's kind of an exception to the rule for a few of them, but the kind of deadline to do anything with them is kind of passed. But state loans or private loans are never going to be eligible for PSLF or any sort of relief from the federal government. So if you ever have a situation where you have direct loans and you decide to consolidate privately, you're doing something, ultimately that's going to be detrimental to your being able to pay off your loans or get them forgiven. Don't ever privately consolidate your loans. Only consolidate your direct consolidation loans into a direct consolidated loan, but never go out into the private market to consolidate your loans, because you would lose your ability to earn forgiveness. There are other loans, like FEL loans and Perkin loans, that are not naturally eligible, but many of these ended kind of being dispersed in 2010 and 2016, I believe. So you don't really have to worry about them unless, you know, you've loans that far back. And there was kind of multiple deadlines over the last year or so to kind of consolidate those, so you were going to get relief under them. So you know, I don't think there's many people on this call that would have that situation, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But if there are folks that are kind of currently have Parent Plus loans, and I'm talking about the individual who took the loans out for their children, those loans would be potentially eligible for PSLF if you consolidate them. Now that is factoring in the public service of the parent, not the public service of the child. So do keep that in mind. But if you do consolidate, ultimately you will be able to stay on track to earn public service loan forgiveness. And this is kind of a new development. It's only come out in the last 18 months that they're now eligible, which is fantastic. So I do want to lift up something that's kind of been in the ether for a while, and there's been deadlines around it that have been delayed kind of multiple times or extended, let's say, around it's sometimes being referred to as an income-driven account adjustment or a payment adjustment, but ultimately it's all tethered around these income-driven repayment plans. You know, we talked about earlier the different plans there are. Right now there's 4 plans that are available on the market that you can select from, but the concept has been around for quite a long time, and depending on the plan that you're in, you're supposed to get taxed forgiveness at 20 or 25 years, depending on the plan. But it came to light in 2020 that, you know, many people were on these plans, that, you know, millions of people were on these plans for decades, and they ultimately had never earned forgiveness, even though they were past the 20th or 25th year. So the current administration took it upon themselves to do this kind of like one-time assessment of everyone's account who was in the income-driven repayment plans, excuse me, and kind of do an assessment of should they have been forgiven or should they be closer to being forgiven because of, you know, ultimate past inaccuracies being fixed. So this process is kind of been elongated over time. They've extended the period for people to consolidate so that they can avail of this kind of generous waiver for this adjustment. So what are they actually looking at during the adjustment? They're looking at any months in repayment status, regardless of the payment made, the loan type of the repayment plan, consecutive forbearance of 12 or more months or 36 or more months cumulative. They're looking at months spent in economic hardship or military deferments after 2013, and then months spent in deferment, not in school deferment, prior to 2013, and then any time in repayment on earlier loans prior to consolidation. So they have kind of updated the federal student aid site multiple times about when this is going to be finished. And our understanding is that this is going to be done in September of this year. And you'll have seen in the news positive stories about how many people are getting relief and getting their loans forgiven around PSLF, because ultimately this is working. This adjustment, while it's focusing on moving people forward in the account adjustment under the IDR, if you've been on track and in public service and you've reached that 120th payment, by looking at these kind of adjustment requirements, people are getting forgiven, which is fantastic. I think the last data point that came out, it was about 62 billion for close to 1 million people had been forgiven over the last year and a half, which is absolutely fantastic. So more people are going to be forgiven between now and September, but ultimately we know that they're going to kind of close up this work in the fall of this year. Please God, it'll be done in September. And it will kind of impact some of the rules around PSLF, because they announced new rules last July and they went into effect for the most part, but during this account adjustment period, some of them have kind of been held back, and I'll talk about some of those requirements now. And some of them have been held back for, you know, for the benefit of borrowers. You're getting greater generosity now where they're doing this adjustment than you will when the rules are fully implemented once the adjustment is done. So the qualifying payments are 120 of them. So it's 120 months, it's 10 years public service. And every single one of those payments, you know, needs to meet a certain criteria to ultimately qualify towards the 120 that you need. So they have to be made after October 1st, 2007. Why is that important? Because that's the date it was signed into law. So if you have public service prior to that date, it's never going to count towards PSLF. You know, you have to have been working full-time at a qualifying employer when you made that payment. You're in the right type of repayment plan. You made the payment in full. And with these new PSLF rules, they did create greater generosity around the deferments and forbearances that if you opt into these, you're still on track to ultimately earn PSLF. In the past, there was a lot of ambiguity about which deferments and forbearances actually qualified for PSLF, and folks are misled by their servicers to say, yeah, that's fine, you can be in that deferment or forbearance and you'll still be on track for PSLF, and they ultimately weren't. So there is greater transparency about the ones that qualify and ones that don't qualify for PSLF. So cancer treatment deferment, economic hardship, military service deferment, post-active duty student deferment, etc. So this list is increased in generosity, which is good. As I said earlier, it doesn't have to be consecutive payments. You don't have to stay in the same job. And it's not tied to the title of your job. You know, I could be the CEO of Equal Justice Works, or I could be an administrative assistant in Equal Justice Works. It doesn't matter because I work for a qualified employer and full-time. I have the right type of loans. I'm in the right type of repayment plan. I should be on track to ultimately earn PSLF. But let's say I decide to leave Equal Justice Works after 5 years and I go to work for a law firm for 3 years. And then I decide, you know what, I actually don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to go back to Equal Justice Works for a further 5 years. I've worked 10 years public service, but because I stopped the clock halfway through, took a for-profit sabbatical, let's say, it has taken me 13 years to get there. So keep that in mind. And then folks that, you know, were in active repayment when the COVID payment pause came into effect, you know, folks were allowed to ultimately stop paying their loans and they weren't going to go into default. And during that pause, all of those months that pause was on, it was upwards, I think it was at least 30 something plus months. It might have been 40 plus months, but those months all count as ones towards the 120 that you need. So you weren't paying, but they were technically eligible months towards the 120 that you need to ultimately earn a PSLF. So payment credits on consolidated loans. I talked a little bit earlier about how the rules have changed, but they haven't really been implementing all of the rules right now while they're doing this account adjustment. This is one of those situations. So once the account adjustment is done, it's actually going to be slightly less generous for folks when they consolidate loans, okay? So in the past, many years ago, when you consolidated your loans and you were kind of misled and thought you were doing the right thing by consolidating, it restarted the clock, and it was really unfair for folks because they thought they were doing the right thing. But now the Department of Education has said, okay, we're going to take the weighted average of the two loans that you're consolidating when you consolidate your direct loan. So that example at the bottom, a borrower with 60 qualifying payments on a direct loan with a balance of 30,000 who consolidates their loan with another direct loan with a balance of 30,000 but has 0 qualifying payments, you're going to have that new qualifying payment count of that weighted average of 30 payments towards your consolidated loan. But right now, under the account adjustment, they are not using the weighted average, they're just counting all of the months. So in that situation, that person in that example would get all 60. So that is likely to end on September 1 of 2024 when the account adjustment is done. So when they're doing that assessment right now, you've got greater generosity around what they're counting as eligible months. This is for folks that, you know, might ultimately be on track to earn PSLF fairly soon. You can, in certain situations, buy back months to ultimately earn PSLF. So if you're, let's say, 10 months away from earning PSLF, you can buy back certain months that you would have, you know, and pay those months that you would have been paying the cost of what you would have been on with an IDR for those months they're saying technically don't qualify, to ultimately, you know, get forgiveness faster. This really is a situation that folks are really close to the finish line, and you're seeing that you're ineligible, you know, or not ineligible, but you're so close, but you thought you were already there. They're saying there are a certain amount of ones that don't count. This would be kind of a resource that I would look into to see if you're eligible for that buyback. There's good resource on federal student aid about it. It's worth reading into it if you think you're in that situation. So the process itself of kind of submitting a PSLF form, you know, as I said earlier, a lot of this can be done retroactively. If you know you're in a situation where, let's say, you've been in public service for 7 years and this is the first time you've heard of PSLF, you can do it by going backwards and getting your previous employers to certify your employment. It's a little bit harder because, you know, you have to track down the HR, you know, contact and get them to certify, and you might know them anymore, etc. But it can be done. Best practice would say you have to have at least, you know, best practice would say you would do it every year with your employer, even if you don't move employers. But if you have one form for every employer you've had in the 10 years, you're fine. For many years, there wasn't actually a form at all. I think the form, you know, the law came into being in 2007, and there wasn't a form until 2012. So for many years, people were, you know, downloading the form and filling it out, and you, until about 2021 or early 2022, you had to have a wet signature on the form. But we've jumped into 2024 with a DocuSign process with the Department of Education, which is absolutely fantastic. However, the email address itself does lean towards a questionable spam energy, in my opinion. A DSE_N4@DocuSign.net is in fact a legitimate email address. It is the DocuSign of the Department of Education. So when you fill out your PSLF form using the PSLF help tool on federal student aid, it is going to, in essence, help you auto-populate the form and generate an email to that employer that you need to certify your employer or your employment, excuse me. So they're going to receive that DocuSign from the Department of Education from that email address. If it's not signed, I believe within 2 weeks, the link expires. So, you know, it is worth your while kind of nudging that individual and saying, like, this does have to be signed as soon as possible because it will go down, you'll have to start again. Generally speaking, I recommend that everyone use the help tool going forward. If you're trying to certify employment, if you're trying to figure out how many payments you have that are qualifying, we'll talk a little bit about how you review that now going forward. And using the help tool when you think you've reached that 120th qualifying payment. Of course, you can Google the form and you can download it and everything, but by using the help tool, you're almost creating a barcode on the form that date stamps when you actually created and generated the form on the back end for the Department of Education. So it's kind of creating an additional paper trail of your progress and better advocacy for yourself when the time comes to earn forgiveness. So tracking your progress of towards the 120 that you need to earn PSLF. This is brand new. It just came out this month. Earlier this year, the department announced that everyone who's been on track for PSLF or who has submitted a form for PSLF has been with a loan servicer for the last year and a half or so called Mahela. Now, Mahela was servicing the loans, but they were also in charge of tracking the loans, which meant that you would log into your loan servicer's your account on your loan servicer's website, and you would be able to track your PSLF status and the qualifying payments you had in their website. That is no longer the case. They shut all of that down in May, and between May and July, the Department of Education were moving all of that over into your federal student aid account. So you go to My Aid in your dashboard, and you're now going to be able to see your PSLF progress there. So the loan servicer, whoever you're with, I assume the vast majority are with Mahela, but folks who are still in law school, you're not with the loan servicer yet at all. You're going to be able to track now in your federal student aid account. So it's just like one less website that you have to navigate to make sense of all of this. Okay, so it is a good thing, but your loan servicers will still service your loans. You'll still be paying your loan servicer your bill each month. It's worth your while, you know, enrolling in auto pay. I think it decreases by like 0.25% your interest of your loan. So it is worth your while enrolling in auto pay, but again, tracking your progress. Brand new knowledge. It is now in studentaid.gov. I'm sorry, I don't have any screenshots for you. That's how new it is. Okay, so the last thing I kind of want to jump into, or just give you some context around, our loan repayment assistance programs. These are programs that are offered by different entities, and it is really worth your while doing your homework on what LRAPs will be available to you and what you would be eligible for. Obviously, it's a bit more paperwork and a bit more homework that you have to do, but in the long run, it might actually help you during that 10 years that you're paying off your loans to supplementally bring that down, that you're not having to put your hand into your pocket, into your discretionary income to pay off your loans, okay? Many organizations, employers now have LRAPs, like Equal Justice Works has an LRAP for our employees. So if I have student loans, I can apply for it, and I'll get a certain amount each month that I can use towards paying off my student debt. So let's say my monthly payment is $400 a month. Equal Justice Works could give me, let's say, $200 a month through our employer LRAP, and that I'm able to bring towards the $400 that I owe. So I'm really only having to take $200 out of my own pocket to pay it down while still staying on track to earn PSLF. So there's no prohibition to you in enrolling in an LRAP or availing of LRAP while on track to ultimately earn PSLF. So employers have them, some states have them, some bar associations, state bar associations have them, some law schools have them. So it is worth your while taking a look at them. The links here on this slide are worth taking a look at. You know, the ABA have a directory of all of the state loan repayment assistance programs. Access Lex, again, has fantastic resources, and they have one-on-one counseling, student debt counseling if you ever need it. It's called Access Connect, which is fantastic. They have webinars around LRAPs. And I have listed here on our website, you know, important questions that you should ask about any LRAP, you know, if you're speaking to one of the administrators of an LRAP, and trying to figure out if you would be eligible for it. And then also, I have listed out on that last link all the law school LRAPs that are eligible or that are available to folks. So your law school may have one that you can apply for. They're all going to have their own requirements, and they may only have a certain amount of money each year that they can disperse to folks. So it is definitely worth your while doing kind of additional research around that. So keep in mind the kind of 2 additional tools in your kit while trying to remain in public service to ultimately earn PSLF is an income-driven repayment plan that should bring down your payment, but also those LRAPs, okay? Like, do your homework and see if you might be available for one or more potentially. Some LRAPs mightn't have a prohibition that you can't be getting an LRAP from somewhere else. So you might be able to avail of more than one. All right, so frequently asked questions. How do I figure out what type of loans I have? You go to Federal Student Aid, click on the dashboard, view details, and you are looking for the title of your loans. I think the vast majority of you are going to have direct loans. So if you see the word direct in the title of your loan, it is the right type of loan. If you want to consolidate your loans, you don't have to consolidate your loans to ultimately earn PSLF. You can, of course, to move faster along. Now, when you do consolidate your loans, if you have direct loans and you want to consolidate, so you just have one payment, it is creating a new loan. It's creating a direct consolidation loan. It's amortizing the interest from those previous loans into this new loan. So it can change your interest, it can change your monthly payment. So it's worth your while, you know, doing your homework as to whether or not that's the right decision for you and your financial needs and your family. Okay. But you can consolidate, and you do that on the Federal Student Aid website as well. You're navigating onto loan repayment and down to consolidate loans. So this is, you know, resources and kind of like the escalation of resources for folks that are having trouble earning PSLF. So there are about 13 states across the US that have student debt ombudspersons. It is worth your while confirming, do I live in a state that has one of them, and should I reach out to them if I'm having issues with my servicer or earning PSLF? That's kind of your first step. Your second step would be, you know, if you've been rejected for PSLF. So you've at the 120th payment, you've submitted your PSLF form and you've been rejected because you don't have enough qualifying payments or whatever, you do have the right to use this reconsideration process. The reconsideration process is very new. It just came out in the last year and a half or so, but it's really important that if you are, you know, denied PSLF under denied PSLF and then you submit and you get rejected and you receive that rejection letter, in order to avail of the reconsideration process, you have to do it within 90 days of receiving that letter. So do keep that in mind. But that is really kind of a dire straits situation that you're at your last kind of point of, not your last point, but you're kind of one of your last resources to get relief to ultimately earn PSLF. So if it is a case that they're like disputing a couple of qualifying payments, maybe worth your while just paying additional months or looking at that buyback option, etc. But keep in mind, you know, the level of escalation at that stage becomes a lot slimmer. The last resort is reaching out to the Department of Education's Ombudsman group. You can submit a complaint with them. When you're doing that, I mean, we are in a profession, generally speaking, if everyone, I'm making the assumption that everyone here is a law student or a lawyer, we're trained to collect evidence and data. So be your own best advocate and do yourself a favor and have a file on your desktop and just keep track of everything. Keep, you know, screenshots of all your payments, download your bank statements. I think banks only keep them for about 7 years. If you ever have to call your loan servicer about payments, ask for the loan servicer's, you know, representative's ID number, take notes, just keep track of everything. I know it sounds a bit paranoid, but it will stand to support you if, you know, you do have trouble at the end of, you know, earning PSLF. It's worth your while doing that kind of due diligence along the way. So we offer webinars around PSLF on a kind of bi-monthly basis for the PSLF Coalition. They are free to all. Please do feel free to spread the word. It doesn't have to be for lawyers. It's any public interest professionals. Our next one for the PSLF Coalition is on August 28th at 1 p.m. So feel free to navigate to the PSLF Coalition website and share the link for the webinars if that's helpful for anyone. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We might have questions, do we?
We have a few. Oh, sorry, Christina, go ahead.
Nope, my fault. Sorry. I just wanted to say I answered them in the chat, but please, Aoife, correct me if I am wrong. Go ahead, Chris.
That's exactly
School
what I was
counselor and me came out.
I'm just reading them quickly through. Yeah, those are all.
And then we've got a new question at the end.
Are the payments only count if they are made while you're in public service? Correct. So you have to be working full time at a qualifying employer. You're on the right type of repayment plan and the right type of loans. Yeah. So again, you know, if you're in an evening student, let's say, and you've opted for in-school deferment and you're working in public service right now, you technically wouldn't be, those months wouldn't be eligible because you're in school deferment. So keep that in mind.
Another question, can you please tell me what in-grace status means when saying ineligible?
I think you're referring to the grace period, maybe. So after you graduate, there's a 6-month grace period where you don't have to pay your loans and you're kind of being ramped up to ultimately earn or go into repayment. And during that time, if you don't opt into an income-driven repayment plan, you're going to be automatically enrolled in the standard 10-year repayment plan. So it's worth your while doing your homework on the 4 different income-driven repayment plans that are out there and figuring out which is the right fit for me and is going to be a viable option for me month to month for the 10 years in public service to be on. But again, you could start on one and be like, the save plan is not the right plan for me. I actually, you know, next year I'm going to recertify and go on the revised pay as you earn, or sorry, the pay as you earn. Revised pay as you earn was replaced by save. They also have a period of time after. Oh, I think I would need more detail, Tiffany, on that.
Tiffany, if you want to follow up with Aoife after our event for a more specific question, she's available for questions for sure. Then Taylor, do 501c6 organizations qualify for PSL?
They don't naturally qualify for PSLF, but again, it's that shorter list that we talked about earlier that don't have 501c3 status that you're going to have to be a bit circumspect about as to whether or not they're eligible. So just on face value, that organization, if that's their status, they probably aren't eligible.
Are there any updates on when the Department of Ed will start processing applications, e.g. when will there pause?
Yeah, so they did pause processing payments between May and July while they were doing this kind of transfer of the external user face of you being able to see your payment counts in FSA rather than Mahela. So my understanding is that they should be processing forms now as of July because that project is done. So they should be processing them. The only thing that I, you know, encourage folks, if you did submit a form between May and July and you haven't heard anything, they have said like don't resubmit the form again because it actually could delay your process even further. So you kind of have to be a bit patient with them. But my understanding is that the pause is over. They are processing them now.
Are there any other questions for Aoife on loan forgiveness repayment?